The conversation we are about to have today is not comfortable, but it is necessary. It is about choices made over decades and the consequences that follow when reality finally demands payment. What you are seeing right now is not a sudden crisis that appeared out of nowhere. It is the final chapter of a long story that many people refused to read while it was being written. If you stay until the very end of this video, you will understand why so many people are confused, angry, and shocked by outcomes that were always inevitable. Let us talk honestly about what is happening and why so many people are struggling to accept it. Across Western and Westernized societies, there is a growing financial strain that is affecting millions of people. And it is hitting women in a very specific and visible way. Rising living costs, housing pressure, debt accumulation, and unstable job markets have created a situation where survival is harder than it has been in decades. What makes this moment different is not just the hardship itself, but the expectation many people still carry about who is supposed to step in and fix it. For a long time, a large number of women were told that they did not need men, that men were optional, replaceable, or even a burden. They were told that independence meant freedom from men, that provision would come from systems, programs, and institutions, and that relying on men was outdated thinking. Those ideas were repeated so often that they became accepted truth, not just socially, but emotionally. For decades, men were told very clearly where they stood. They were told they were not wanted, not needed, and not welcome unless they met increasingly narrow and demanding conditions. They were told not to approach, not to initiate, not to lead, and not to expect appreciation for effort or sacrifice. Many men were told that their role as providers was obsolete and that their value was conditional at best. Over time, men listened, not in anger at first, but in quiet acceptance. They stepped back, they stopped engaging, they stopped chasing, they stopped trying to prove themselves to people who openly said they were unnecessary. What we are seeing now is not men changing suddenly. It is men remaining consistent with the message they were given for 50 years. As financial pressure increases, many women are turning to dating apps and social platforms with a renewed urgency. The language has changed, the tone has shifted, and the messaging has softened. Where there was once distance, there is now appeal. Where there was once dismissal, there is now outreach. But men are not responding the way many expected. Men are looking more closely than ever, asking questions they were previously discouraged from asking, and making decisions based on self preservation rather than obligation. They are noticing debt, they are noticing financial instability, they are noticing expectations that flow in one direction. And instead of stepping in to rescue, they are stepping away. This reaction is not rooted in cruelty or revenge, it is rooted in wisdom gained through experience. Many men have lived through years of being told that their presence was not valuable unless it came with resources. They watched as commitment was framed as weakness and provision was framed as control. When you teach people long enough that their effort will not be respected, they eventually redirect that effort inward. Men found peace in solitude. They found structure in routine. They found stability in focusing on their own health, finances, and personal goals. They discovered that a quiet life without constant negotiation of worth was not loneliness, but relief. Now, as economic pressure mounts, the expectation that men will return to their traditional role without acknowledgement of the past is colliding with reality. Men are not rushing back because there is nothing pulling them there. They are not motivated by guilt, social pressure, or moral obligation anymore. They are motivated by peace. They are motivated by stability. They are motivated by the understanding that saving someone else at the cost of their own well being is not noble, it is self destruction. There is a growing frustration online as some women express anger toward men for refusing to step into financial rescue roles. This frustration often appears as blame, accusation, and shaming language. But anger does not change facts. Men did not create this situation alone, and they are not responsible for fixing it. Systems that promised security without accountability failed. Narratives that dismissed partnership in favor of independence failed. And the idea that men could be discarded and later recalled on demand has failed. Men are choosing not to date. They are choosing not to marry. They are choosing not to enter arrangements where the risks are high and the rewards are uncertain. This is not a protest, it is a preference. When men look at modern dating dynamics, legal structures, and social expectations, many conclude that participation is optional, not mandatory. They have learned that opting out is allowed, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Some men, who still desire companionship, are looking beyond Western systems entirely. They are exploring relationships in countries where expectations are clearer, roles are more balanced, and appreciation is expressed openly. This is not about exploitation or superiority, it is about alignment. People seek environments where their effort is valued and their presence is welcome. Because when that is not found locally, people look elsewhere. That is human behavior, not a conspiracy. What makes this moment so jarring for many is that it reveals a dependency that was denied for years. Partnership was reframed as unnecessary until survival made it relevant again. But partnerships built on desperation are fragile. Men understand this instinctively. They know that entering a relationship as a solution to someone else's crisis creates imbalance, resentment, and eventual collapse. They are choosing not to repeat cycles they have already lived through. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable because it forces accountability. It forces a recognition that actions have consequences even when intentions were framed as empowerment. It forces an acknowledgement that independence also means responsibility for outcomes. Men accepted that lesson long ago. They learned to live with the results of being unwanted. Now others are being asked to do the same. None of this means that people deserve hardship or suffering. It means that no one is entitled to another person's labor, resources, or protection simply because times are difficult. Compassion does not require self sacrifice without consent. Support does not mean obligation. And partnership cannot be summoned only when convenient. Men are not celebrating hardship. They are simply not volunteering to absorb it. They are focusing on their own happiness, stability, and future. They are building lives that do not depend on external validation. They are investing in themselves, their health, their finances, and their peace. For many, this is the first time they have felt truly free. This shift is not temporary, it is not a phase. It is the natural result of long term messaging meeting economic reality. The days of easily finding someone to rescue you from hardship are ending, not because people are cruel, but because people are finally honest. Everyone is being asked to stand on their own feet now. The safety nets that were assumed to exist are thinner than expected, and personal responsibility has returned to the center of the conversation. If this feels harsh, it is because reality does not soften itself to spare feelings. It simply unfolds. Men are not coming back to old roles without new terms. They are not returning to systems that dismiss them. They are not abandoning peace to re enter chaos. That decision has been made quietly, steadily, and with clarity. As this shift continues, what becomes increasingly clear is that many people misunderstood what independence actually meant and said independence was never freedom from consequences, it was freedom from reliance. That distinction matters now more than ever. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. For years, Independence was marketed as liberation without trade offs, as a state where support systems would quietly replace personal responsibility and where outcomes would always be softened by intervention. But independence in its truest form means standing alone when necessary and owning the results of one's decisions. Men learned this lesson early because they had no choice. They were expected to manage risk, failure, and rejection without complaint, without support, and without sympathy. Over time, this forged a kind of emotional resilience that now looks like indifference to outsiders, but is actually discipline. When men walked away, they did not do so dramatically. There was no announcement, no coordinated movement, no public declaration. It happened privately, one man at a time, deciding not to pursue, not to chase, not to invest emotionally where the return was uncertain or negative. One man at a time, choosing quiet evenings over conflict, routine over volatility, self improvement over constant negotiation. These choices compounded over years, creating a demographic reality that is now impossible to ignore. The absence many feel today was built slowly, deliberately, and with intention. What complicates the conversation is that public narratives lag behind private behavior. Media, institutions, and social commentary still operate as though traditional dynamics are intact, even as participation declines. Advice given to women often assumes men are waiting in reserve, eager to resume roles they were told to abandon. That assumption is no longer accurate. Men are not waiting, they are living. They have structured their lives around autonomy and predictability. And many are unwilling to dismantle that stability for relationships that do not clearly enhance their lives. This is why attempts to shame men back into participation fail. Shame only works when people seek approval from those applying it. Men who have stepped away no longer do. Their sense of value is internal. They do not measure success by external validation or social praise. They measure it by peace, progress, and control over their time. Calling them selfish, immature, or avoidant does nothing because those labels no longer carry power. Men have already been called worse for simply existing. Words have lost their leverage. Another factor often ignored is how deeply trust has been eroded. Trust is not rebuilt by necessity, it is rebuilt by consistency. Men were told repeatedly that their commitment would not be reciprocated, that their sacrifices would be minimized, and that their boundaries would be challenged. They were shown through policy, culture, and social norms that risk would be unevenly distributed. Once trust is broken at scale, it does not return simply because circumstances change. It returns only when behavior does. As economic stress increases, the instinct to seek security is natural. But security built on expectation rather than agreement creates tension. Men recognize when they are being approached as solutions rather than partners. They can sense when interest is driven by fear rather than connection. That awareness makes them cautious. They have learned that being needed is not the same as being valued, and that need often disappears once the crisis passes. There is also an unspoken generational component to this shift. Younger men grew up watching older men navigate systems that offered diminishing returns for traditional effort. They saw marriages dissolve, assets divided, and emotional labor dismissed. They internalized those lessons early. As a result, many never fully entered the system to begin with. They optimized their lives around minimal exposure to risk. They chose careers, hobbies, and social structures that did not depend on romantic partnership. To them, opting out is not rebellion, it is default. The question many ask is whether this is sustainable long term. The answer depends on adaptation, not nostalgia. Societies evolve based on incentives. When incentives change, behavior follows. If partnership is to regain relevance, it must offer mutual benefit, clarity, and respect. It cannot rely on obligation, pressure, or tradition alone. Men have demonstrated that they are willing to live without partnership, if the alternative compromises their well being, that is not a threat. It is a statement of boundaries. What we are witnessing is not the collapse of relationships, but the end of automatic access. Relationships now require effort from both sides, not just in words, but in action. They require realistic expectations and shared responsibility. They require appreciation rather than assumption. These are not unreasonable standards, but they feel foreign to those who were told they would never need to meet them. It is important to say clearly that none of this means cooperation is impossible. It means cooperation must be voluntary. It means people must choose each other for reasons beyond convenience or survival. Men are open to connection, but not to obligation disguised as affection. They are open to companionship, but not to rescue missions. They are open to love, but not to leverage. As more women confront financial hardship without the safety nets they expected, there will be a period of anger, denial, and confusion. That is a part of adjustment. But eventually, reality forces recalibration. Skills must be developed, spending must be managed, expectations must be revised. This is not punishment, it is adulthood. Men went through this process quietly for decades. Now others are being asked to do the same. There's also a deeper psychological shift taking place. For a long time, identity was tied to external support and validation. Now, identity must be built internally. That is uncomfortable, but it is also empowering. When people realize they are capable of surviving without rescue, they gain confidence that no system can provide. That confidence changes how they approach relationships, work, and life itself. Men, having already crossed that threshold, are not eager to return to dependency dynamics. They want equals, not dependence. They want cooperation, not obligation. They want appreciation, not assumption. These desires are not extreme, but they require honesty to fulfill. As the dust settles, the loudest voices online will continue to argue, blame, and demand. But real change does not happen in comment sections. It happens quietly, in daily decisions, in who people choose to spend time with, in what risks they accept, in what they refuse. Men have been making those decisions consistently for years. That consistency is why the shift feels sudden only now. There is no villain in this story, only outcomes. Outcomes shaped by culture, policy, and personal choice. Everyone played a role. Everyone now faces the results. The sooner that is accepted, the sooner constructive solutions can emerge. If there is a lesson here, it is that telling people they are unnecessary eventually teaches them to live without you. Telling people their effort is unappreciated teaches them to withhold it. Telling people they are replaceable teaches them to replace the system instead. None of this is emotional, it is logical. Men are not waiting to be convinced, they are waiting to be respected. Until that happens, they will continue to choose the path that offers the most stability and the least conflict. That path, for many, is solitude paired with purpose. And as this reality becomes more visible, there will be attempts to reframe it, to soften it, to deny it. But numbers do not lie. Participation rates tell the story clearly. Engagement has declined because the cost benefit analysis changed. Men noticed, men adapted, men moved on. The future will belong to those who understand this shift and respond with humility rather than entitlement, with accountability rather than accusation, with cooperation rather than coercion. Anything else will simply accelerate the distance that already exists. As this reality settles in, another layer becomes impossible to ignore, and that is the difference between being supported and being sustained. Support is temporary, situational, and reciprocal. Sustenance is long term, expected, and often one directional. For years, many social narratives quietly shifted from encouraging mutual support to assuming sustained provision. Men were expected to be the stabilizing force, the financial backstop, and the emotional anchor, even while being told that their role was outdated. That contradiction could only exist as long as men continued to participate out of habit rather than choice. Once choice entered the equation, the structure weakened. Men began to realize that stability created through personal discipline felt better than stability borrowed from relationships that carried constant conditions. When you build your life around your own effort, your sense of control increases. You wake up knowing your outcomes are tied to your decisions, not someone else's moods, expectations, or approval. That sense of ownership is addictive in the healthiest possible way. It removes anxiety. It removes the need to perform. It removes the fear of sudden loss tied to factors outside your control. This is why appeals based on fear or urgency fall flat. Telling men that society will collapse without their participation does not motivate them because they were already told society did not want them. Telling men that women are struggling does not move them because men struggled quietly for decades without support. Empathy exists, but obligation does not. Right? Men can care without intervening. That distinction is critical and often misunderstood. Another overlooked factor is how differently men and women experience solitude. For many men, solitude is not isolation, it is space. It is relief from constant evaluation. It is freedom from roles they never consented to. Solitude allows men to think clearly, plan deliberately, and move at their own pace. Over time, that solitude becomes familiar, then comfortable, then preferred. When people try to pull men out of that space without offering something clearly better, resistance is natural. This is why transactional framing fails here. When relationships are presented as exchanges where one party brings stability and the other brings need, men disengage. They have learned that imbalance breeds resentment and that resentment poisons connection. Men want relationships that add value to lives that are already complete, not relationships that exist to compensate for instability. As financial pressure intensifies, many conversations shift toward fairness, but fairness requires symmetry. You cannot ask for traditional provision while rejecting traditional responsibility. You cannot ask for protection while dismissing authority. You cannot ask for sacrifice while denying appreciation. These contradictions are now being examined closely, not out of hostility, but out of necessity. Men are not rejecting relationships, they are rejecting asymmetry. They are rejecting narratives that position them as tools rather than partners. They are rejecting expectations that were never negotiated but simply assumed. When people say men have changed, what they often mean is that men stopped accepting terms they never agreed to. This shift has also exposed how much emotional labor men were carrying without acknowledgement. They were expected to be calm in chaos, strong in uncertainty, and composed in conflict. They were expected to absorb stress quietly and provide reassurance endlessly. When men stepped away, many realized how much invisible work had been happening all along. The absence revealed the weight, and now as systems strain and personal finances tighten, that invisible labor is no longer available on demand. Men are no longer cushioning impact or smoothing consequences. They are letting outcomes land where they fall. This is not cruelty, it is boundaries. Boundaries that were learned through experience. There is also a myth that men are bitter or angry in their withdrawal. For most, the opposite is true. Men report feeling calmer, healthier, and more focused after stepping back. Without constant negotiation of identity and worth, they can direct energy toward growth. They invest in skills, fitness, learning, and long term planning. They build routines that reinforce progress rather than chaos. This is not escape, it is optimization. As more men adopt this approach, it creates a feedback loop. Younger men see the benefits and emulate them. They see older men living quietly content lives without the drama they were warned was inevitable. They see that fulfillment does not require constant pursuit of approval. This observation shapes behavior early. making re-entry into old dynamics even less likely. Attempts to frame this as a crisis of masculinity misunderstand the situation entirely. This is not a loss of masculinity, it is a refinement. Men are defining themselves on their own terms rather than through external expectations. They are choosing agency over approval. That choice does not require permission. The discomfort many feel now comes from realizing that leverage has disappeared. When someone no longer needs what you offer, influence fades. This forces a reevaluation of value, not perceived value, but actual contribution. Relationships built on mutual contribution endure. Relationships built on leverage collapse when leverage is gone. This moment is an opportunity, not a catastrophe. It offers a chance to rebuild cooperation on honest foundations. But that rebuilding cannot begin with denial. It must begin with acknowledgement that messaging mattered, that choices mattered, that telling people they were unnecessary eventually taught them to live as if that were true. There is also a need to separate compassion from responsibility. Compassion allows us to understand struggle. Responsibility determines who addresses it. Men can feel compassion without assuming responsibility for problems they did not create. That boundary is healthy and overdue. As more people confront this reality, the noise will increase. There will be louder arguments, sharper accusations, and more attempts to moralize personal preference. But moral pressure does not override autonomy. It never has. People comply when incentives align, not when they are shamed. Men understand this because they lived it. They were told to comply for years without incentive, and they chose not to. That choice reshaped the landscape. Now everyone must navigate the new terrain. The future of relationships will depend on clarity, clear expectations, clear roles, clear respect. Ambiguity benefits no one. Men are no longer willing to operate in gray areas where accountability is uneven. They want transparency, fairness, and appreciation that is shown, not promised. This does not mean romance is dead. It means romance must be rooted in reality. It must coexist with responsibility. It must complement independence rather than replace it. Men are open to that model. They are simply unwilling to regress. As this adjustment continues, some will adapt and thrive, others will resist and struggle. That outcome is not gendered, it is behavioral. Those who accept responsibility and develop resilience will find stability. Those who cling to outdated expectations will feel increasingly frustrated. The quiet truth is that no one is coming to save anyone anymore. That era is ending for everyone, not just women. Systems are strained, resources are limited, personal agency is returning to the forefront. This is not a punishment, it is a reset. Men embraced that reset early because they had to. Now others are encountering it by necessity. The sooner that reality is accepted, the sooner meaningful cooperation can return. As this reset unfolds, another truth becomes visible, one that many avoided because it challenged comforting assumptions. For a long time, stability was treated as something external, something that could be accessed through alignment with the right institution, the right ideology, or the right partner. Very few people were encouraged to build it internally. Men, however, were forced into that position early. When support was removed, when sympathy was scarce, and when expectations remained high, men learned to become self contained out of necessity. That experience rewired priorities. Once someone has learned how to stand alone, they do not easily return to dependence, even if dependence is framed as connection. This is why appeals to nostalgia fall flat. References to how things used to be assume a shared desire to return. Men do not share that desire. For many, the past represents sacrifice without appreciation, effort without security, and commitment without reciprocity. There is no emotional incentive to revisit that structure. When people say men should step up again, what they are really asking is for men to resume absorbing risk without guarantees. Men have already evaluated that proposal and declined. What replaces nostalgia is realism. Realism accepts that partnership must compete with solitude, not with loneliness. Solitude offers predictability, autonomy, and peace. Any relationship that cannot exceed that baseline is not attractive, regardless of social pressure. This standard is not cruel, it is rational. Men are not rejecting connection, they are comparing it honestly to an alternative they know well. Another difficult adjustment is recognizing how deeply incentives shape behavior. For decades, men were told that their value was conditional and that commitment carried disproportionate risk. Legal structures, cultural narratives, and social expectations reinforce this message. When incentives discourage participation, participation declines. This is not a moral judgment, it is an economic principle applied to human behavior. Men noticed the imbalance and responded logically. As participation declined, a strange contradiction emerged. Men were told they were unnecessary, yet blamed when they were absent. They were told to disengage, then criticized for disengaging too well. This contradiction created confusion for those who never expected men to take the message seriously. But men did. They listened, adapted, and built lives accordingly. The emotional response to this adaptation often manifests as shock. Shock that men did not return when circumstances changed. Shock that appeals to responsibility no longer resonate. Shock that indifference has replaced eagerness. But shock is not an argument. It is simply the realization that assumptions were incorrect. Men did not withdraw out of malice, they withdrew out of self preservation. Over time, self preservation became self respect. That transformation is permanent. Once someone understands their worth independently of external validation, they do not surrender it easily. They do not negotiate it away for acceptance. They protect it. This protection often looks like detachment to those who expect emotional availability on demand. But detachment is not emptiness, it is selectivity. Men are choosing where to invest energy with intention. They are asking whether involvement enhances or diminishes their quality of life. These questions were once discouraged. Now they are central. The economic dimension of the shift cannot be separated from the emotional one. Financial instability exposes dependency patterns quickly. When resources tighten, people look for anchors. For a long time, men were expected to be those anchors. Now they are declining the role, not because they cannot perform it, but because they no longer see it as fair or sustainable. What many struggle to accept is that fairness is not about outcomes, it is about process. A fair process allows choice. Men are exercising choice. That choice may produce uncomfortable outcomes for others, but discomfort does not invalidate autonomy. It simply reveals reliance that went unacknowledged. This moment is forcing a reckoning with expectations that were never explicitly agreed upon, expectations that survived only because they were inherited, not examined. Once examined, many fell apart. Men realized they had been participating in arrangements that did not serve them, often out of a sense of duty that was never reciprocated. Removing themselves from those arrangements was not abandonment, it was correction. There is also a growing awareness that emotional narratives cannot override material reality. Feelings do not pay bills, ideals do not create stability, intentions do not replace effort. Men learned this lesson early because they had to. Now it is being learned more broadly. As people adapt, there will be attempts to redefine success. Success will be framed less around partnership and more around independence, less around validation and more around capability. This shift will be uncomfortable for those whose identity was tied to being chosen rather than being capable. But identity built on external selection is fragile. Identity built on competence endures. Men understand this intuitively now. They are building lives where partnership is optional, not central. This does not diminish the value of relationships, it contextualizes them. Relationships become additions rather than foundations. That change alters everything from expectations to behavior to longevity. This also explains why men are not rushing to negotiate new terms under pressure. Negotiations conducted under desperation are rarely fair. Men are willing to wait, or time favors those who are self sufficient. Pressure favors those who need relief. Men are not in a hurry because their lives are stable. The narrative that men are avoiding responsibility misses the point entirely. Men are embracing responsibility for themselves. They are declining responsibility for others who rejected shared responsibility in the past. That distinction matters. Responsibility without authority is exploitation. Men have learned to avoid it. As this understanding spreads, social dynamics will continue to evolve. Some will adapt by developing skills, managing finances, and recalibrating expectations. Others will resist, clinging to narratives that no longer align with reality. The gap between these groups will widen, not because of gender, but because of adaptability. Adaptability has always determined survival. Those who adjust to changing conditions thrive. Those who deny change struggle. Men adjusted early. Now others must decide whether to do the same. There is no return to the old normal because the old normal relied on silent compliance. That compliance is gone. What replaces it must be built intentionally. That process will take time, honesty, and humility. Humility is the hardest part. It requires admitting that some beliefs were incorrect, that some choices had unintended consequences, that independence without preparation leads to vulnerability. Men faced similar realizations long ago. They adapted. That adaptation is now being misunderstood as apathy. It is not apathy, it is clarity. Clarity allows men to say no without anger. It allows them to decline roles without resentment. It allows them to live quietly without justification. This clarity is what many find unsettling because it cannot be manipulated. As more people encounter this clarity, they will be forced to confront their own assumptions about security, partnership, and responsibility. Some will rise to the challenge. Others will demand the past return. The past will not return. The future will belong to those who build rather than demand, who contribute rather than expect, and who partner rather than depend. Men have already aligned themselves with that future. The question now is who else will join them? As this transformation continues to unfold, one of the most revealing developments is how silence has replaced argument. In earlier years, men tried to explain themselves. They debated, they defended their position, they attempted to clarify boundaries and express concerns. Those efforts were often dismissed, reframed, or minimized. Over time, men learned that explanation was unnecessary when outcomes spoke louder than words. Silence became the most efficient response. Not because men lacked opinions, but because they no longer felt obligated to justify personal choices to a culture that had already made up its mind about them. This silence is often misinterpreted as disengagement from society as a whole. In reality, men have not disengaged from life, work, or progress. They have disengaged from systems and dynamics that demanded sacrifice without reciprocity. They are still contributing economically, innovating, creating, and building. They are simply doing so on their own terms, without tying their identity or worth to romantic validation or social approval. This distinction matters because it reframes the narrative from abandonment to redirection. Redirection is a powerful force. When energy is redirected inward, growth accelerates. Men who once poured effort into proving their value to others now invest that effort into mastering skills, improving health, and securing financial stability. The returns on these investments are tangible and immediate. Confidence grows quietly. Independence strengthens steadily. Over time, the desire to re enter unstable dynamics fades because the contrast becomes too stark. This is where many observers miscalculate. They assume that men are waiting for conditions to improve before returning. They believe that once messaging softens or incentives increase slightly, men will resume old roles. But men are not waiting, they have already moved on. Their lives are full, structured, and satisfying in ways that do not depend on external validation. Returning would require dismantling systems that are working well for them. That is a high cost with an uncertain reward. Another layer of this shift involves time perception. Men who have stepped away experience time differently. Without constant emotional turbulence, time becomes expansive. Days feel productive rather than draining. Progress becomes measurable rather than abstract. This relationship with time reinforces the decision to remain disengaged from unnecessary conflict. Once someone experiences calm continuity, they become unwilling to trade it for chaos, regardless of how that chaos is marketed. This change also challenges long held assumptions about motivation. Many believed men were driven primarily by approval, companionship, or social expectation. When those incentives were removed, it was assumed men would collapse or rebel. Instead, they recalibrated. They discovered intrinsic motivation. They learned to pursue goals for their own sake. This shift is subtle but profound. Intrinsic motivation is durable. It does not require external reinforcement, it sustains itself. As intrinsic motivation replaces external pressure, compliance disappears. Men no longer feel compelled to conform to narratives that do not serve them. They are not hostile to those narratives, they are indifferent. Indifference is often more unsettling than opposition because it offers no leverage. You cannot negotiate with someone who is content without you. This contentment is not uniform, but it is widespread enough to alter social dynamics at scale. When large numbers of men opt out of traditional pathways, those pathways lose influence. Marriage rates decline. Dating participation decreases. Engagement metrics fall. These are not moral judgments, they are observable trends, and trends reflect choices. The discomfort many feel stems from realizing that choice has shifted power. Power does not reside in demands, it resides in options. Men now have options that do not involve partnership. They have built alternatives. When partnership is no longer the only route to fulfillment, it must compete on merit. That competition has exposed weaknesses that were previously hidden by assumption. One of those weaknesses is the reliance on emotional urgency. Urgency can motivate short term action, but it cannot sustain long term commitment. Men recognize urgency when they see it, and they are wary of it. They understand that decisions made under pressure often lead to regret. As a result, they slow down, they observe, they evaluate. This patience frustrates those who expect immediate response. But patience is a luxury earned through stability. Stability is the cornerstone of this entire shift. Men prioritize stability because their instability was costly. Emotional instability drained energy. Financial instability limited options. Social instability created risk. By reducing exposure to these factors, men improve their quality of life. That improvement is reinforcing. It validates the choice to disengage. As stability increases, tolerance for instability decreases. This is why men appear less forgiving of red flags or imbalanced expectations. They are not less compassionate, they are more selective. Selectivity is not judgment, it is boundary enforcement, and boundaries protect what has been built. The conversation around fairness often overlooks this protective instinct. Fairness is framed as shared burden, but burden sharing requires shared consent. Men are no longer consenting to arrangements that expose them to disproportionate risk. This refusal is interpreted by some as selfishness. In reality, it is self governance. Self governance is a concept many were never encouraged to develop. It requires discipline, foresight, and accountability. Men developed it because they had to. Now it defines their approach to relationships and life decisions. They are not looking to be managed, corrected, or guided by external forces. They are managing themselves. This self management also explains why attempts to reframe narratives using fear or guilt are ineffective. Fear loses power when survival is not threatened. Guilt loses power when values are internally defined. Men who have built stable lives are not easily swayed by emotional manipulation. They have already navigated worse without support. As more people encounter this reality, there will be attempts to pathologize it, to label detachment as avoidance, independence as isolation, and self focus as immaturity. These labels serve to reassert control, not to describe reality. Men who are healthy, productive, and content do not recognize themselves in these descriptions. As a result, the labels fail to land. What is emerging instead is a quiet confidence, not loud, not performative, not seeking attention, just present. This confidence does not announce itself, it does not need to. It shows up in consistency, reliability, and calm decision making. It is attractive in its own way, but it does not chase attraction. This non chasing posture is another source of misunderstanding. Many were taught that pursuit defines interest. When pursuit disappears, it is assumed interest is gone. In reality, pursuit disappeared because it was no longer required for fulfillment. Interest now requires invitation rather than assumption. That shift redistributes responsibility. Redistribution of responsibility is at the heart of the current tension. Responsibilities that were once assumed to belong to men are now unclaimed. That vacuum forces others to step in or adapt. This is uncomfortable, but it is also clarifying. It reveals which responsibilities were shared and which were simply expected. As this clarity spreads, relationships that do form will be different. They will be slower, more deliberate, and more conditional. Men will enter them with caution, not enthusiasm alone. They will assess alignment carefully. They will prioritize peace over passion if forced to choose. This does not mean romance is diminished. It means romance is grounded. Grounded relationships last longer. They are built on mutual respect rather than fantasy. They require effort from both sides, not just one. Men are open to this model because it aligns with how they live. The broader implication is that society is moving toward a model where no one is automatically responsible for anyone else. That responsibility must be chosen and negotiated. This is a significant cultural shift, and it will take time to normalize. Resistance is natural, but resistance does not stop change. Change continues regardless of comfort. Men recognized this early and adapted. That adaptation is now setting the standard. Others can meet it or struggle against it. The outcome will depend on willingness to accept reality rather than demand exceptions. There is no villain here. There is no conspiracy. There is only cause and effect. People respond to incentives. Men responded by prioritizing themselves when told they were unnecessary. That response worked. Now it defines the landscape. As this pattern becomes clearer, another assumption begins to collapse. And that is the belief that social pressure can override lived experience. For a long time, social messaging functioned as a kind of invisible governor on behavior. People acted in certain ways not because those actions benefited them, but because deviation carried social cost. Men absorbed those costs for years. They were criticized, dismissed, and told their discomfort was irrelevant. Over time, the cost of compliance exceeded the cost of non participation. Once that threshold was crossed, pressure lost its effectiveness. Men discovered that the consequences of opting out were far less severe than the consequences of staying in. This realization fundamentally altered how men evaluate risk. Social disapproval used to feel dangerous because belonging was tied to survival. But modern life revealed something different. Survival became individual, community became optional, validation became internal. When that shift occurred, social pressure lost its teeth. Men no longer feared being misunderstood or mischaracterized because those judgments no longer threatened their stability. What replaced fear was discernment. Discernment is quieter than rebellion, but far more powerful. It allows people to choose selectively without hostility. Men did not need to argue their way out of old roles, they simply stopped showing up. An absence, unlike protest, cannot be negotiated with. This absence exposed how many structures relied on default participation. They were never designed to function when people opted out at scale. They assumed compliance, not consent. When consent was withdrawn, cracks appeared. Dating platforms saw engagement drop. Marriage rates continued to decline. Long term commitments became rarer. These are not isolated phenomena, they are interconnected signals of a deeper shift. What unsettles many observers is that men appear calm throughout this process. There is no visible panic, no urgency to correct the narrative. That calm is misread as apathy, but it is actually confidence. Confidence that life does not require universal approval. Confidence that fulfillment can be self generated. Confidence that peace is worth protecting. This calm also stems from a realistic understanding of trade offs. Men are not under the illusion that opting out eliminates all difficulty. They know solitude has its own challenges, but they have weighed those challenges against the alternatives and made a conscious choice. When someone has accepted trade offs willingly, they are less susceptible to manipulation. You cannot threaten someone with a consequence they have already chosen. Another important shift is how men now define success. Success used to be framed externally through milestones like marriage, family formation, and social status. As those milestones lost reliability and predictability, men recalibrated. Success became internal markers like financial independence, physical health, skill mastery, and personal freedom. These markers are measurable, controllable, and durable. They do not depend on another person's behavior. Once success is redefined this way, the incentive structure of relationships changes dramatically. Relationships are no longer pathways to success, they are optional enhancements. This removes desperation from the equation. Without desperation, negotiation becomes balanced. Without balance, negotiation does not happen at all. This is why attempts to reintroduce urgency into relationship narratives fail. Urgency only works when the alternative is worse. For men who have built stable, independent lives, the alternative is often better than unstable partnership. That reality forces a reckoning with value proposition. What does partnership offer that independence does not? If that question cannot be answered honestly, engagement will not increase. Another overlooked aspect of the shift is how it affects emotional regulation. Men who are not constantly navigating relational uncertainty experience fewer emotional spikes. Their baseline stabilizes. Stress becomes episodic rather than chronic. Over time, this improved regulation becomes a non negotiable standard. Anything that threatens it is avoided instinctively. This instinct is often mistaken for emotional unavailability. In truth, it is emotional selectivity. Men are not shutting down, they are filtering. They are choosing where to open up based on evidence rather than hope. This approach reduces disappointment and increases satisfaction. It is a learned behavior reinforced by experience. Experience is the great teacher here. Men did not arrive at these conclusions through ideology. They arrived through lived outcomes. They tried participation. They assessed the results. They adjusted accordingly. This process was iterative and pragmatic. It had nothing to do with proving a point and everything to do with improving quality of life. As more men share similar experiences, a collective understanding emerges even without coordination. Patterns repeat. Lessons spread informally. Younger men observe older ones and internalize their choices. This generational transmission accelerates change. It ensures that the shift is not temporary or reversible through messaging alone. This is where many institutions find themselves unprepared. Institutions move slowly. Cultural narratives update gradually, but individual behavior adapts quickly when incentives change. By the time institutions respond, the landscape has already shifted. Men moved on before their absence was even acknowledged. Acknowledgement is coming now, but it is late. And late acknowledgement rarely restores trust. Trust requires consistency over time. Men do not see evidence that the underlying dynamics have changed, only that the consequences are now inconvenient. That perception makes reconciliation difficult. The truth is that trust was eroded quietly, one dismissal at a time. Rebuilding it will require sustained effort, not reactive outreach. It will require structural change, not rhetorical adjustment. Men are watching, but they are not waiting. Waiting implies anticipation. Men are not anticipating a return, they are content where they are. Any future engagement will be evaluated on its own merits, not on promises of reform. This evaluation process is methodical. Men assess compatibility not just emotionally, but practically. They consider lifestyle alignment, financial philosophy, conflict resolution style, and long term goals. They are less willing to gamble on potential. They prefer demonstrated consistency. This preference frustrates those who relied on potential in the past. Potential is subjective, consistency is observable. Men choose observable traits now because they reduce risk. This is not cynicism, it is risk management. Risk management becomes essential when legal, financial, and emotional stakes are high. Men understand that recovery from loss takes time and effort. Having already rebuilt once, many are unwilling to repeat the process. That unwillingness is not stubbornness, it is wisdom. As these patterns solidify, the cultural conversation will continue to lag. There will be calls for understanding, empathy, and compromise. Those are valid in principle, but they must be mutual. Men extended understanding for years without reciprocity. They are no longer interested in unilateral compromise. Mutuality is the new baseline. Anything less is rejected quietly. This quiet rejection is why the shift feels invisible until it reaches critical mass. By the time it becomes obvious, it is already entrenched. What remains now is adaptation. Individuals must adapt to a world where automatic provision is gone, where partnership must be earned rather than assumed, where independence is expected, not optional. This adaptation is challenging, but it is also empowering. Empowerment does not come from rescue, it comes from capability. Men learned that lesson through hardship. Now others are being invited to learn it through necessity. The invitation is open, the outcome is not guaranteed. Those who accept responsibility will find stability. Those who resist will feel increasingly alienated. This is not judgment, it is consequence. And as everything we have discussed comes together, What remains is not anger, not triumph, and not regret, but acceptance. Acceptance is the quiet stage. People reach after resistance no longer serves them. It is the point where energy stops being spent on denial and starts being spent on adjustment. Men reach the stage earlier than most, not because they were ahead, but because circumstances forced them there. When support is withdrawn and expectations remain, adaptation becomes survival. That survival then becomes structure. That structure becomes identity. And identity, once formed through lived experience, is not easily rewritten by slogans or appeals. And one of the hardest truths to confront is that no one owes anyone a life raft simply because the water is cold. Compassion can exist without obligation. Empathy can exist without sacrifice. These distinctions matter because they define healthy boundaries. Men learn to draw those boundaries after watching what happens when boundaries are ignored. They learn that rescuing others often leads to self erasure, and self erasure benefits no one in the long run. The era that is ending was built on unspoken expectations, expectations that men would endure, absorb, and provide regardless of how they were treated. That endurance was mistaken for consent. When consent was finally withdrawn, confusion followed, but confusion is the price of clarity arriving late. Men are not celebrating hardship, they are not cheering instability. They are simply refusing to re enter roles that require them to abandon the peace they worked to build. That peace was not handed to them. It was earned through solitude, discipline, and accountability. It came from learning how to live without applause. Once someone has learned that lesson, they do not unlearn it. This is why attempts to frame men as villains fail. Villains seek harm. Men are seeking stability. They are seeking control over their time, energy, and future. They are seeking lives where effort produces predictable outcomes. That desire is not immoral, it is universal. What is changing now is who is expected to carry weight. For decades, weight distribution was uneven. Some carried more because they were told they must. Now that expectation has dissolved. Everyone is being asked to carry themselves. That is not abandonment, it is adulthood. Adulthood is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It removes the illusion that someone else will fix what you ignore. It demands preparation. It demands foresight. It demands ownership. Men were forced into this reality early. Now it is becoming universal. The discomfort many feel is not caused by men stepping back. It is caused by the realization that independence was misunderstood. Independence is not freedom from effort, it is commitment to it. Independence is not liberation from responsibility, it is acceptance of it. Men accepted that trade long ago. They built systems around it, they structured their lives to minimize reliance on others. That structure gave them peace. That peace is now non negotiable. As this chapter closes, the future becomes clearer. Relationships will still exist, but they will be fewer, slower, and more intentional. They will be based on mutual contribution rather than assumption. They will be formed by people who are already whole, not by people seeking completion through another. This is not a loss, it is a refinement. People who adapt will discover strength they did not know they had. People who resist will feel increasingly frustrated. The difference will not be gender, it will be mindset. Mindset determines whether change is experienced as punishment or as opportunity. Men reframe change as opportunity. That reframing changed everything. What remains now is honesty, honest assessment of what works and what does not, honest acknowledgement of past messaging and its impact, honest rebuilding of cooperation on terms that respect autonomy on both sides. Men are open to that future. They are not hostile to connection. They are simply unwilling to return to imbalance. They are unwilling to trade peace for promise. They are unwilling to be guilted into sacrifice. This moment does not require outrage, it requires adjustment. The old social contracts expired quietly. No announcement was made, no renewal was negotiated. Life moved on. Those who noticed adapted. Those who did not are noticing now. The most important takeaway is not who is right or wrong. It is that reality does not bend to ideology, it bends only to preparation. Men prepared. That preparation insulated them from the shock others are now experiencing. If there is frustration, let it become fuel. If there is disappointment, let it become direction. If there is fear, let it become discipline. No one is coming to save anyone anymore. And that truth, once accepted, becomes empowering rather than frightening. The future belongs to those who build, not those who demand. It belongs to those who contribute, not those who expect. It belongs to those who adapt, not those who cling to the past. Men have already chosen their path. Others are free to choose theirs. Before we close, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed in this video? Do you agree with the direction things are moving? Are you seeing similar patterns in your own life or among people you know? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because these conversations matter and they help bring clarity to issues that are often ignored or misunderstood. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, Men Walking Away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.